9.4 is where you're going to start solving the quadratic equations by factoring. So the first part that we're going to be doing is it's already factored. So if you remember, factored means it has these two sets of parentheses already laid out for you. So if it's already factored for you, you're going to use the zero product property, which just says that I can set both of these factors equal to 0 and then solve for the missing value. So for example, I could set this factor, 4t plus 1, equal to 0, and I could set this factor, t minus 2, equal to 0. Then I'm just going to solve those equations. So if I went ahead and did this first one on the left, I would minus 1 from both sides first. So then I would have 4t equaling negative 1, and then I would divide by 4. Now, we've been using our calculators quite a bit here, and you can divide these on your calculator and get a decimal, which would be negative 0.25. However, it is a lot faster for you to leave it in this fraction form. Notice that when I divide 1 by 4, since it's a decimal, this is my fraction because it's already been reduced. So I would prefer that you write it in fraction form, just because some of those decimals might get a little messy. Okay, so then my other one, I had t minus 2 equaling 0. That's easy. All I have to do is just add 2 to both sides, and then t is by itself. So my two answers would be negative 1/4 and positive 2. Okay, pause the video and see if you can do the next two in the got it section. Okay, the first got it question has x plus 1 and x minus 5. So the first thing I would do is go ahead and separate both of those. So I would do x plus 1 equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0. Then I would solve both of those equations. So this first one I would minus 1 from both sides, so I would get x equaling negative 1. The second one I would add 5 to both sides, so I would end up getting x equaling 5. So my two answers would be negative 1 and 5. Now on the second got it question, you're going to still do the same thing, but you should be getting a fraction on one of them. So I would do 2x plus 3 equaling 0 and x minus 4 equaling 0. On that left side, when you minus 3 from both sides, you get 2x equaling negative 3. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Again, I cannot divide negative 3 and 2 evenly to get a whole number, so I'm going to write it as that fraction because it won't reduce. So my answer for that one would be negative 3/2. Then for the other equation, I would add 4 to both sides and just get x equaling 4. So your two answers on the second got it should be negative 3/2 and positive 4. Okay, so that top part, they had done all the work for you in the factoring process. So they already factored it. All you had to do was set the factors equal to 0. The second part is where we have to factor it before we can do the setting equal to 0. So if you remember, our steps are looking for a greatest common factor. So my greatest common factor is 1, so I don't have to worry about that piece. Then I slide this number if I need to. So when I slide 1, it still is going to stay 15. So 1 times 15 is 15. Then I come over and I do my x. So I do 15 and 8. And I want them to times to 15 but add to 8. So I write all the factors of 15. So 1 and 15, 3 and 5. The set that adds to 8 is 3 and 5, and they're all positive, so that means these are going to be both positive. So that means for my factors, I would have x plus 3 and x plus 5. So this first step is you have to now factor it. From there, it's the same as what we did above. So now we set both of them equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0, and then solve them. So you would subtract on both of them and end up getting negative 3 and negative 5. So the only difference is you will have to do the entire process together on some of these where you will have to factor and then solve it. See if you can do the got it question on the next page. So on the got it question, on the first one, I have sliding this 1 over means it still stays as 20. So I need to multiply to negative 20 but add to positive 1 that's in front of this p. So I need factors of 20. So all the factors of 20 are 1, 20, 2, 10, 4, 5. The set that would add or subtract to 1 would be 4 and 5. So since I need positive 1, I want a negative 4 and a positive 5. So that means it would factor as p minus 4 and p plus 5. So then I can set both of those equal to 0. P minus 4 equals 0, P plus 5 equals 0, and then solve it. So add 4 on the left one, minus 5 on the right one, so my two answers would be 4 and negative 5. Now the second one, a little bit more involved because you do have a number over there that you will have to slide. So this is where I would need to do the slide, divide, and the bottoms up method because I have a number in front. So I would slide that 2 over. So 2 times 18 is 36. So my new equation that I would need to be factoring is this. So that means in my x, I would have to do 36 and then add to negative 15. So all the factors of 36 are 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. So the set that adds or subtracts to 15 is 3 and 12. Since this is negative, I would want both of those to be negative so that it would add to negative 15. So right now, I would have a minus 3 and a minus 12 as my two factors. But remember, we slid, so that means we have to do the rest of the process, which is what some of you have forgotten in the past. So that means I have to undo this timesing. So I come back and I have to divide by the number I slid. So I divide both of those by 2. 3 halves does not divide evenly, so it stays as 3 halves. 12 and 2 divide evenly, so it becomes 6. Since this is the fraction, I bottoms up that 2 in front of that coefficient. So now it's factored as 2a minus 3, a minus 6 equaling 0. So this one's a little bit more involved in terms of the factoring, just because you have to do all 3 pieces. So make sure if you slide, you do the rest of them. From there on out, it's the same. So I set them equal to 0. So 2a minus 3 equals 0, a minus 6 equals 0. This one on the right side would be easy because all I have to do is add 6 to both sides and I get 6. This one over here should end up as a fraction because you're going to add 3 to both sides, so you'd get 2a equals 3. And then you have to come back and divide them both by 2. I cannot divide 3 by 2 evenly, so this ends up being my fraction, 3 halves. Okay? Alright, so I've showed you the whole process that we're going to be factoring it, and then you're going to be solving it, setting each factor equal to 0. The last piece is, what if it looks just a little bit different than what all the other problems are? So this is where they've already done a GCF, and so it doesn't have 2 terms in front of here. But it doesn't mean that you do anything different. So just think of this first term as having parentheses around it. I still have to set both of them equal to 0. So I would still have to do 3x equaling 0 and x minus 5 equaling 0 and solve it. So just because it looks different doesn't mean you change anything. So this has already been factored, so then I would solve it. So I would divide both of these by 3, so one of my answers would be 0. On this one I would add 5, so then my answer would be 5. So my two answers would be 0 and 5. Now on this one over here, notice there are no parentheses, so that shows me that they did not factor it yet. Since there's only 2 sets of 2 terms, I would look for a greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor for the numbers, for 4 and 20, I would write out all the factors, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, 20. The biggest one they have in common is 4. Then I do the same thing with the letters. X squared and x means I have 2 x's and 1 x. They only have 1 x in common. So that means my greatest common factor would be 4x that I'd want to take out. So that means up here when I factor it, I am taking out a 4x. So to find what's left over, I come back and I divide both of those by 4x to find what to put in my parentheses. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. X squared divided by x is just x to the first because I subtract those exponents. 20 divided by 4 is 5. My x's cancel because there's just 1 x on both of them. So now here are my 2 sets. Remember we just got done talking. This is like if you put parentheses around it, it still acts as a factor. So then I set both of them equal to 0. So I have 4x equaling 0, x plus 5 equaling 0, and then I solve it. So I would divide both of those by 4, subtract that one by 5, so my two answers would end up being 0 and negative 5. So you're doing a lot of stuff that we've already done in the past. So greatest common factor and factoring. A lot of those things we did in Chapter 8 are reappearing because that's how you solve a quadratic as well. Alright, let me or Mr. Gahan know if you have questions. Otherwise, go ahead and start your assignment.